Today, I'm joined by Ed Ansett, who's the Global Director of Data Center Technology and Innovation at Ramboll. So, my first question to you is, you've been working in data center design and infrastructure for a long time. I'm wondering what's changed most recently in how organizations are thinking about sustainability.
I think most recently we're seeing organizations having to tackle things like demand response, grid support, um, and heat exports. It's not to say these things are completely new, but the data center developers are increasingly under pressure by local authorities to think more about how they're contributing back to society. So those two things are probably the most recent things that have impacted the data center community in terms of data center development, and that isn't everywhere. I mean, it's particularly true in Europe and the Nordics, but increasingly in other parts of the world as well.
So, the term net zero is something now that is widely used in the industry. I'm wondering, where does the concept start to lose that meaning in practice, or has it lost the meaning in practice?
Well, it has really, hasn't it? I mean, so a lot of companies, we'll mention names, but it should be fairly obvious who we're talking about, have claimed to be net zero for some time. And this has really been achieved primarily through something called carbon offsetting. So where net zero kind of starts to lose it a bit is that whilst carbon offsetting is laudable and is necessary, it really should be the last resort rather than the first resort when it comes to net zero. So we need to first of all look at our operational carbon profile. Are we buying as much renewable energy as we possibly can? And also our embodied carbon profile. Are we minimizing the amount of embodied carbon that's going into the data center? Ultimately, you are going to end up with a finite amount of carbon in any building project, and certainly in a data center. So that's when ultimately carbon offsetting comes in. But as a last resort, once we've done all the other measures, probably going to talk about quite a few of them today. Once we've done all the other things, that's when we sort of fill the gap with offsetting. So that's really where it's lost its way, in my view.
And could we go into some of those other measures? So you say that carbon offsetting is the last resort. What would you say is the first place like an operator or developer should actually start? Is it from the design and build stage, or having that kind of implemented through their kind of campaigning for the space?
So if you look, so this question is specifically around carbon rather than sustainability, right? Because carbon is a subset of sustainability. So dealing with the carbon side of it only, then the operators really got to ask, and typically in any data center, because they're such large consumers of electricity, their operational carbon tends to dominate total carbon over embodied energy. And that's not to say embodied energy isn't important. It is, but is it's pretty much dwarfed by operational carbon. Very much depends on where in the world you are and what the grid emission factor is. But for most countries, operational carbon is going to dominate. So that really needs to be addressed at the get-go. In a perfect world, you go off grid and you generate purely renewable energy yourself, however that might be, biomethane, CCUS, or purely renewable energy from other sources. That's really a great starting point, but it's not always practical. Okay, so there's the operational carbon's a key piece, and then we look at the embodied carbon and all the things that go with that.
So AI obviously is a big booming industry as it's coming into, people were wanting return on investment. We're seeing more capacity in the densities. So as these AI workloads increase power density, where have you seen, or where do you envision the biggest pressures will start to show up when it comes to data center design?
Well, in terms of design, the pressures are really around dealing with these increases in density. We're currently at 100 and something kilowatts per rack. We're moving to a few hundred kilowatts per rack. So then to 600, we're talking about a megawatt per rack. And we're getting to a point where now we need to change from the internal distribution system within the rack. The voltage needs to increase, and this is well understood. And then, where we're going to be in 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we really don't know. So these are the kind of challenges in terms of design that have to be dealt with and are being dealt with. But those are the main things. The increased density means changes in the way that we provision them from a power point of view, and changes in the way that we cool them. And then, of course, on top of that, there's not so much a design issue, is where's this power coming from? Because we're talking about vast amounts of power.
Mm. Yeah. Do you think that people are going to be well prepared and well informed about the different channels and options available to them, or even for the having the foresight when it comes to AI density workloads? Is it your experience that people are kind of aware of the amount of demand that it requires, essentially?
Yeah, I think it's widely known. I mean, the main player in the market, as we all know, is in terms of the GPU is NVIDIA, and they've outlined in the public roadmap, what their plans are. And they in turn have been joined by partners who've worked out what the power and cooling solutions look like. So yes, I do think people are informed, but it doesn't really tell us really, where we're going to be. We're talking about sort of a 3 to 5 year horizon here at the moment. Where are we going to be after that? Because these data centers aren't going to be built for just 3 to 5 years.
Exactly. And that leads me on to my next question, which is this kind of tension between resilience and sustainability. So, the resiliency of data centers as we have these new technologies coming to play, and that tension between having them still powerful enough to function and then also being kind of kinder to the planet. So, where do those trade offs become the most difficult to manage?
Well, I sort of see a different problem here. So yes, there is, to a degree, there is a trade-off between resilience and sustainability, because obviously increased resilience means increased number of components, redundant components, and therefore lower sustainability in principle. But I think the bigger challenge is actually the trade-off between sustainability and cost. That is what I see as the major obstacle to carrying out some of these important initiatives.
So in terms of cost, in what way the cost is in the kind of balance of the price is in the hike of it, or the kind of the need of, or how much money is it required in order to actually produce a piece of infrastructure that is in a way the most sustainable that it can be? Is that what you're
Well, I
getting at?
mean, yeah, I mean, it can be a whole series of different things that, from a sustainability point of view, can increase costs. Whether that's enhanced biodiversity, or circularity,
No.
or just the way in which the system is designed. But very often there is a trade-off, and an adverse cost impact of doing some of the sustainability measures that would make sense if it were not for the cost associated with them. And it's very difficult to generalize about that. But as a rule of thumb, a lot of the measures that we'd like to see taken from a sustainability point of view have a cost premium associated with them.
I see. So it makes it quite difficult then to basically buy into the sustainability that you want for your facility if there's just nothing that is
Yeah, I mean,
in that realm.
if you're a co-location service provider, you know, um, yeah, you want to do the right thing from a sustainability point of view, but you also have to compete with other co-location service providers. So, sometimes by introducing additional sustainability measures, there's a cost impact associated with that, which levels itself out eventually, but puts you a cost disadvantage in the first instance.
There's also this kind of debate about retrofitting and new build. Obviously,
Mm.
each of them have both of their limitations and their bonuses. What tends to shape the kind of direction that a firm might go into, versus the reality of the choices that they have? Is it more of a kind of intricate decision, or is it just, this is the capacity that we have? It looks good retrofit perspective to reuse the kind of land and the buildings that are available. What's your perception on that?
I think this is a tricky one. Again, looking at it from a sustainability angle, there's a strong imperative associated with refurbish. Okay, but there are obvious problems with that, because many data centers that you're looking to refurbish are clearly not new. They were built 10, maybe 20 years ago. So from a power density point of view, they're completely out of line with contemporary power requirements. So the question would be, well, okay, let's refit, let's refurbish, but is the power available? And the answer is whatever the answer is. Um, so that's one thing, and the other thing, sometimes in an existing data center, you can't just stop. You've got tenant agreements, you've got lease agreements that, until they naturally terminate, you really can't do anything about it. So sometimes your hand is forced, and you have to build your own. But I think the main drivers are always in this case are practical and economic factors. Is the space available at the right price? When can I get the power? Vis-a-vis trying to make do and mend sometimes with what you've got.
I think a lot of the time also when you hear about retrofitting, I think there's a public perception that it is all down to the developer's choice whether, they should be retrofitting, they should be doing this because of this kind of negative connotation you hear. Do you think there needs to be more public kind of understanding or teachings as to the realities of the choice, where sometimes it's not fit for purpose, you've got to,
Yeah, I
revamp
mean,
the state?
exactly. It's unfair to simply say to people, you have to retrofit. You have to. It may not be practical. That there is obviously there are some good reasons for retrofitting. I mean, I mentioned sustainability, but cost could well be another. Basically got an existing structure. If that bears out, and if you can get the power, and if your lease agreements are in the right place, then people will do it. But there's a few sort of ducks that have to line up to make that happen.
Yeah, a couple of ducks that are there for biodiversity purposes that have to line up.
Yeah.
Exactly. And just on that same kind of track then, jump on the other side of it, because I know that we've been speaking about sustainability and it's not always a choice. Sometimes you have to go with what is available to you and what is affordable and, doing the most sustainable things you can with the facilities and the practicalities that you have to hand. But for some organizations, have you ever witnessed a kind of perspective that they think they're being sustainable, but they're building sustainably, but actually they're not? Like they could be doing a bit more to actually enhance that kind of journey to net zero, maybe a slight change they haven't perceived before.
No, I think honestly, organizations these days, they're pretty switched on. Most of them have got, their own internal sustainability groups. They're striving to do the right thing, but they're typically up against, a variety of barriers, commercial barriers and other things. So no, I honestly think the industry's come a long, long way in terms of its efforts to become more sustainable, but it's got a very, very long way to go to make that a reality. Because there's a heck of a lot to do.
For sure. And maybe that's what is one of these assumptions about data center sustainability that won't hold up, the kind of perceptions that data centers are intentionally being unsustainable from a public perception. But
Yeah,
on
I
that
mean,
on that line, is there anything else you think might be a challenge to the assumptions that people have long held?
well, listen, I think one thing that's got to be stamped out altogether is the greenwashing that's been going on for a long, long time. Okay, I mean, let's stop talking. Let's stop calling ourselves carbon neutral, but just because we're carbon offsetting. Let's have a more transparent view of what's going on in data, which is what we're going to get through the European directives, and hopefully, much less greenwashing and a better understanding of where everybody is on their
Right.
journey to sustainability.
And do you think that's key then, that knowledge sharing and that opportunity for forum and collaboration? Would that be something you would encourage, or is
Oh
it a
yeah,
lot more harder to engage in that way than people perceive?
our industry has been terrible at sharing information for years. I mean, it's been absolutely awful. It's if people think it's mine, it's mine. Mine. I want to share it. From a sustainability point of view, that's less true, I think. And yeah, I think the dilemma is we're coming to the party quite late in the evolution, as it were, of climate change, as it were. But I think given enough time and given the amount of government interest that we're seeing these days and local municipality interest in sustainability, that they're going to make sure that they're going to keep the industry honest. They're going to keep us on the right track.
That's a lovely optimistic tone to end on. But I have one final kind of question for you, which is that you'll be having a session at Tech Show Frankfurt as part of Data Center World there. Is there anything you'd like to share ahead of the session to our audiences, what they might expect, some of the talking points?
Well, I
anything-
think, well, one thing might be useful is what was frustrating for us a little while ago was that everyone was kind of interested in sustainability, but nobody's really independently talking about how do you get there. So we've attempted to put together a roadmap with a set of sustainability metrics or benchmarks. And the idea is sort of not to, hey, Ramboll, but say, look, everybody, this is really what we should be looking at doing, whether it's biodiversity, water reuse, embodied ecological impact, heat export, embodied energy, operation, all of these things
Mm.
are brought together in a set of benchmarks. And, I think that's really, as an industry, what we need to be shooting for, try and meet those benchmarks.